If you are a DACA recipient, should you travel on advance parole? That's the question we're going to answer here today. It's a big question. It's really important to understand the risks and the benefits and decide what you might want to do. So I'm attorney Kaylani Hawks Villafranca. I've guided hundreds of clients through the DACA process, and I've handled advance parole for many of those people. So I'm here today to give you my advice as somebody who's seen this process, who understands the law and the current situation, so you can make a decision about whether or not you should reach out to me or to another attorney to help you with this process. If you have DACA, or you've ever had DACA, keep your DACA valid. That's the first thing I want you to know, is that renew your DACA as soon as you can. There will be likely changes to the DACA program, or there could be. We're waiting on a court ruling. I did another video about that, so go check that out. In the meantime, while you still have DACA and while you can still renew your DACA, right now in November 2022, you are still eligible for DACA advance parole. Now, that may not be true in the future. We may get a change in the DACA status that might prevent you from traveling on advance parole. What is DACA advance parole? Why does it matter? If you have DACA, you can ask for permission to travel outside of the country and re-enter on a grant of advance parole, which is a government document that says, I've looked at this person's information, they have a valid reason to travel, please let them back in the country when they present themselves at the border. Okay. If you have DACA, you are normally not allowed to travel. If you leave the United States and you have DACA, you have no way to get back into the United States. So you have to have this advance parole document to get back in. There are 3 reasons that you could ask for advance parole. They are for school, work, or humanitarian reasons. If you need to attend a study program abroad, that's a valid reason to ask for advance parole. If your job needs to send you to a conference abroad, that's a valid reason to ask for advance parole. And last but not least, and very importantly, if you have an urgent or critical humanitarian reason for travel, you can seek advance parole. This is the most common way that my clients come forward and ask to travel and are granted advance parole travel. So what is an urgent humanitarian travel reason? And generally it means a sick relative. So many of my clients and many of you who have DACA are from Mexico. You may not have been to Mexico for 20 years at this point, and perhaps you have a grandmother that you spent a lot of time with when you were little who is now ill. And it would be very important for you to be able to see your grandmother before that's no longer possible. And that's an urgent humanitarian need for travel. I've also had clients who weren't able, unfortunately, to return to Mexico before their grandparent passed away. And they were able to ask for advance parole to be able to either attend the funeral, or if they weren't able to get there that quickly, to go to the graveside and to pay their respects to their family member they hadn't seen in a long time, and that was really important to them, and was a humanitarian reason for travel. I've had clients whose parents were in surgery in Mexico and asked to be able to be with them during that surgery. So sort of critical periods of time in your life, family relationships can support a humanitarian request to travel on advance parole. Should you do it? That's a big question, right? I have heard of other attorneys who are very conservative and say, don't travel, it's not worth the risk. I don't think that's the right approach, because traveling with advance parole can be a game changer for your immigration future if you last entered the country without a visa. Let's talk about why. Many of you DACA recipients will have a way to get an immigration status in the future. Either you will marry a U.S. citizen, you will have a job that wants to sponsor you, something like that. If we're talking about marriage to a U.S. citizen, you can only do that within the United States if you last entered the country on a valid visa. If you showed up at the border and presented your visitor visa and then perhaps overstayed 20 years ago, then in the future, you can adjust your status without having to leave. But if you came with a parent, you crossed the Rio, crossed the desert, however you entered, but it wasn't at a border crossing, and you have no stamp to prove you entered lawfully, you have to leave if you're married to a U.S. citizen and you want to get your green card, unless you have a lawful entry. Now, of course, we know the visa is a lawful entry, but advanced parole is also a lawful entry. Advanced parole is a way to correct the unlawful prior entry and fix your ability to stay here and not have to leave. And so it's a huge benefit to many of my clients. Now, if you last entered with a visitor visa, this isn't going to give you the same benefit. So maybe you're less inclined to travel. You don't want to take the risk because there is a small risk. But if you last entered without a visa and you can fix your entry and make it lawful, is a huge benefit to you. And I really encourage you to think about doing so. The risk to travel is that you might not get back in. Okay, that's a huge risk. We don't need to pretend it's not a big risk. But the likelihood of that happening is extremely low if your case is properly analyzed by an attorney and there's nothing strange or unusual or risky about your case. If you have a felony conviction, I would not travel. If you have a prior deportation, I would really think about it and talk to your attorney about what that looks like for you. But if your case is clean, you have no criminal history, you have no immigration deportation history, you've always paid your taxes, like there's nothing strange and concerning about your background, the risk to you is extremely low. All of my clients have gotten back in the United States. I don't know of anyone, I don't know of any of my colleagues' clients who haven't gotten back in the United States. I saw one news report one time of a DACA recipient who got stuck outside and wasn't let back in advance parole. That person eventually was let back in as well. Certainly, there have been people who traveled on advance parole and were not permitted back in the country. It's very rare though. And if your case is clean, you should expect to be able to come back in. There's always the risk you won't and something strange will happen. But I've not heard of that happening. And that's not a fear that I have for my clients. And I encourage them to travel if they feel comfortable with that very small risk. And because it may change drastically your U.S. immigration future and give you a much better possibility of adjusting status here through a U.S. citizen spouse, either now or in the future. I hope that's been helpful. Give me a call if you want help analyzing this and we can talk more about it. Bye.